The pink silk was the only soft thing in the redemption saloon. It clung to the woman's form, a pale blossom in a room built of splintered wood, stale beer, and hardened men. The dress, a traditional cheongsam with a high collar and delicate embroidery along the hem, was an act of defiance in the dust-choked air of Harmony Gulch, Nevada. Her hair was a coil of black lacquer, held in place with a single pin. In her hands, she carried a wicker basket filled with neatly folded and pressed laundry, smelling of lye soap and sunshine, a scent so out of place it was almost a profanity. Her name was Leanne, and she was the widow of a railroad man named Chen. When the tunnel collapsed 6 months prior, it had taken her husband and left her with little more than the deed to a small clapboard house and his final, unfulfilled laundry contract with the saloon's owner. So, every Tuesday, she walked through the swinging doors, her head held high, and entered a world that did not want her. The usual murmur of conversation guttered out as she entered. Men at the tables turned, their eyes lingering on the unfamiliar grace of her movements, the impossible color of her dress. In a corner, away from the bar's clamor, Jasper Kane watched over the rim of a wine glass. He was not a whiskey man. Wine was slower, more deliberate, and it suited him. He was a lean, quiet man with eyes the color of a stormy sky and hands that rested on the table with a stillness that was more menacing than any fidget. His Colt peacemaker was tied low on his hip, the leather worn smooth from long practice. He was just passing through Harmony Gulch, but he'd been passing through for 3 weeks now, and he found the town's rhythms, its small cruelties and smaller kindnesses, to be a subject of mild interest. Leanne ignored the stares and walked directly to the bar where the proprietor, a portly man named Finch, was polishing a glass with a dirty rag. She placed the basket on the worn wood. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Your linens." Finch grunted, not looking at her. He gestured for her to take the stack of soiled tablecloths and aprons from the floor beside the bar. As Leanne bent to collect them, 2 men slid off their bar stools, blocking her path. They were the Barlow brothers, Clay and Wade, who worked hauling freight for Silas Croft, the man who owned the freight line and half the town along with it. "Well now, look what we got here," Clay said, his voice a gravelly drawl. He was the larger of the two, with a thick neck and a mean set of eyes. A little china doll, all dressed up. Wade snickered, a high, unpleasant sound. "That's a mighty fancy dress for laundry day." Leanne straightened up, her expression unreadable. She clutched the handle of her empty basket. "Excuse me. I must go." Clay put a thick, grimy hand on her arm, his fingers digging into the delicate silk. "Not so fast. We're just being friendly." The fabric of her sleeve wrinkled under his grip. In the corner, Jasper Kane slowly lowered his wine glass. His gaze, which had been passive, sharpened. He noted the slight tremor in the woman's hand, the rigid set of her shoulders. He saw Finch deliberately turn his back, busying himself with bottles on a high shelf. No help would come from that quarter. "Your hand is soiling the fabric," Leanne said, her voice losing none of its composure. "Please, remove it." The directness of her command, devoid of pleading, seemed to amuse Clay. He tightened his grip. "Or what? You gonna send your ghost of a husband after me?" The insult hung in the hot, still air. It was a low blow, even for the redemption saloon. A few of the other patrons shifted uncomfortably, but no one moved to intervene. The Barlows worked for Croft, and no one wanted trouble with Silas Croft. But Leanne did not flinch. She simply met his gaze. He was a better man than you will ever be. For a moment, Clay's face went slack with surprise, then it darkened with rage. He raised his other hand, palm open. From his corner table, Jasper was already moving. He didn't hurry. He rose from his chair in one fluid motion, the scraping of the wood on the floorboards a sound as sharp as a cocking hammer. "The lady," Jasper said, his voice calm and even, cutting through the tension, "asked you to let her go." Every eye in the saloon swiveled to him. Clay Barlow turned, his hand still on Leanne's arm, a sneer twisting his lips. "This ain't your concern, stranger. Go back to your fancy drink." Jasper took another step forward, his boots making a soft, deliberate sound on the floor. He stopped about 10 feet away. His hands were empty, hanging loose at his sides. "You put your hands on her," he said, as if explaining a simple fact. "You made it my concern." Wade, the smaller brother, stepped up beside Clay, his hand hovering over the butt of his pistol. "There's two of us, friend." "I can count," Jasper replied, his eyes never leaving Clay's. "And I see one man who's a half second from losing the use of his hand, and another who's about to watch it happen." The threat was so plainly delivered, so devoid of bluster, that it silenced the room completely. Clay, caught between his wounded pride and the stranger's unnerving confidence, made the wrong choice. He shoved Leanne away from him, sending her stumbling back against the bar, and his hand clawed for the pistol at his hip. He never cleared the leather. Jasper's draw was a blur of motion, a flicker of dark metal in the saloon's dim light. The report of the Colt was a single, deafening crack. Clay's pistol, knocked from his grip, spun through the air and clattered to the floor. Clay howled, clutching his hand where the bullet had seared the flesh of his palm without breaking the bone, a gunslinger's warning shot. Wade froze, his hand still poised over his own weapon, his face pale with shock. Jasper's pistol was still leveled, smoke curling from the barrel. "You can try your luck," he said quietly to Wade. "Or you can pick up your brother and walk out of here." For a long moment, Wade stared at the unwavering black eye of the Colt's muzzle. Then, with a jerky nod, he holstered his weapon and helped his groaning brother to his feet. Clay shot a look of pure venom at Jasper, then at Leanne, who was watching, her back pressed against the bar, her face a mask of composure. The Barlows stumbled out through the swinging doors, leaving a thick, ringing silence behind them. Jasper holstered his pistol. He walked over to the bar, retrieved Leanne's basket of soiled laundry, and then turned to her. "Are you all right?" he asked. She gave a small, sharp nod, her composure finally beginning to fray at the edges. Her hands were trembling slightly. "Yes. Thank you." He looked at Finch, who was now staring, wide-eyed, from behind the bar. "Put her payment on my tab," Jasper said. He then turned back to Leanne, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Let me walk you home." He did not yet know that this single act of intervention had just tied his fate to that of the woman in the pink dress, and that Silas Croft was not a man who forgave insults to his employees. The walk to her home was short and silent. Leanne's laundry was a small, tidy clapboard house at the edge of town, with a well-tended patch of herbs growing by the door. A long line of clean, white sheets flapped gently in the late afternoon breeze. The place was an island of order and quiet dignity. Inside, the front room served as her workspace. It was spare but immaculate, dominated by a large cast-iron stove for heating water and a long wooden table for folding. The air smelled of soap and steam. Leanne set the basket of dirty laundry down and turned to him. In the privacy of her own home, some of the tension left her shoulders. "I do not know how to thank you, Mr. Kane." "Jasper Kane." "Mr. Kane," she said, her gaze direct. "You did not have to do that. Men like that only understand one language," he said simply. "I happen to be fluent." She gestured to a small table with 2 chairs. "Will you take some tea? It is all I have to offer." He found himself accepting, though he had planned on being halfway to Carson City by nightfall. He sat while she moved about the small room, her movements efficient and graceful as she prepared the tea. He watched her hands, steady now, as she measured leaves into a small porcelain pot. She brought 2 cups to the table. The tea was fragrant and delicate. They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment before she spoke again. "My husband, Chen, he made the contracts," she said, looking down into her cup. "He was a good man. He believed in the promise of this country. He thought if he worked hard, people would see the man, not his face." She looked up, and her eyes held a deep, weary sadness. "He was wrong." Jasper said nothing, but he listened. It was a skill he had perfected over years of sitting in quiet corners. He took this contract with Mr. Finch. He thought it was a start. When he died in the rockfall, the debt for this house was not yet paid. The contracts are all I have. If I stop, I lose this place. It is all that is left of him. She reached into a pocket of her dress and pulled out a small, smooth, grey stone. She rubbed her thumb over its surface. He found this in the river the day we were married. He said it was plain but strong. Like us. Jasper looked at the stone, then back at her face. He saw the strength she was talking about. It wasn't in the delicate silk of her dress, but in the unyielding line of her jaw, the clarity of her eyes. You honor him by staying, Jasper said, the words feeling inadequate. A small, sad smile touched her lips. I try. He stayed for another hour, talking little, but listening a great deal. He learned she was from a province in the south of China, that she had come across the ocean on a crowded ship to join Chen, who had worked on the Central Pacific Line. He learned of her loneliness in a town where she was seen as a curiosity at best, and a target at worst. When he finally rose to leave, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the valley. The Barlows work for Silas Croft, he said, his voice low. Croft won't like that his men were made to look foolish. I know, she said, her face betraying a flicker of fear. I am not a fool, Mr. Kane. I know what this will cost. Be careful, he told her, and left. But he didn't ride out of town. He took a room at the boarding house, telling himself it was just for one more night. The cost came the next day. It wasn't the Barlows who appeared at her door, but Silas Croft himself. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his silver hair neatly combed. He carried a silver-headed cane, though he had no need of it. He was polite, his smile never reaching his cold, calculating eyes. He tipped his hat to Leanne when she opened the door. Mrs. Chen. My name is Silas Croft. May I have a word? Warily, she allowed him onto her small porch. He came right to the point. It has come to my attention, he began, his voice smooth as oil, that your late husband had an outstanding debt with my freight company. A loan for supplies when he first arrived here. $200. Leanne's blood ran cold. $200 was an impossible sum. Chen had never mentioned such a loan. I do not believe that is correct. My husband was very careful with money. Croft produced a piece of paper from his coat pocket. It was a promissory note, with a signature at the bottom that crudely resembled Chen's. The signature seems quite clear. I have been patient, given your circumstances. But my patience has its limits. I am prepared to forgive the debt, however. Leanne looked at him, knowing there was a trap. In exchange for what? This small piece of land, Croft said, tapping the porch railing with his cane. The railroad will need to expand its depot soon. This plot will become quite valuable. It seems a fair trade. The deed, in exchange for the cancellation of his debt. She knew, with absolute certainty, that the note was a forgery. Croft wanted her land, and he was using the Barlow's humiliation as the pretext to take it. I will not give you my home, she said, her voice shaking but firm. Croft's smile tightened. A regrettable decision. The Barlows were very upset about yesterday's misunderstanding. They feel their honor was insulted. I can only keep them restrained for so long. It would be a shame if something were to happen to this nice, orderly business of yours. He tipped his hat again. You have until Friday to reconsider. Good day. He left her standing on the porch, the fraudulent paper of the debt feeling as heavy as a death sentence. She knew what he was threatening. Fire. Destruction. Violence. She was alone, and she was trapped. That evening, she saw Jasper Kane walking down the street. On an impulse, she stepped out of her doorway. Mr. Kane. He stopped, turning to face her. She told him everything. About Croft's visit, the forged note, the threat. When she was finished, she looked at the dusty street, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I think I must leave. There is no other way. Jasper was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains, now purple in the twilight. He had a horse, a good one. He had money in his pocket. He could be 100 miles away by morning, free of this town and its troubles. It was the smart thing to do. It was the thing he always did. But then he looked at her, at the quiet resilience in her face, and he thought of her standing up to Clay Barlow in the saloon, her voice clear and unafraid. He thought of the small, strong stone her husband had given her. "No," he said, and the single word seemed to settle something in the air between them. "You're not leaving. This is your home." He finally met her eyes, and she saw a resolve there that startled her. "Let me see that promissory note." For months later, the chill of late autumn had settled over Harmony Gulch. The cottonwoods along the creek had turned a brilliant gold, and the air had a crisp edge that promised an early winter. At the edge of town, the chimney of Leanne's small house sent a steady plume of wood smoke into the clear blue sky. Inside, the laundry business was thriving. The clean, soapy scent now filled a new lean-to added to the side of the house, where another Chinese woman, Mrs. Yi, worked alongside Leanne, folding sheets. The saloon contract had been joined by new ones from the boarding house, the town doctor, and even the telegraph office. Outside, Jasper Kane split logs with a steady, rhythmic swing of his axe. The pile of firewood was already stacked high against the house, enough to last them through the harshest winter. He hadn't left. He had moved his things from the boarding house into the small spare room in Leanne's home, a move that had set the town gossips to whispering, but the whispers died down when people saw the quiet, respectful way he conducted himself. He was her protector, her partner, and something more that neither of them had yet dared to name. The matter with Silas Croft had been resolved not with a gun, but with a telegraph key. Jasper had taken the promissory note to the telegraph office. He knew the signature was a forgery, but he also knew that accusing a man like Croft in a town he controlled was useless. Instead, he sent a carefully worded message to a U.S. Marshal in Sacramento he had once ridden with. He didn't ask about the debt. He asked about Silas Croft himself. The reply came 2 days later. The marshal remembered Croft well. He was wanted in California under a different name for a series of fraudulent land grabs, using forged debt notes to intimidate settlers into signing over their deeds. The marshal had lost his trail a year ago. He was very interested to learn of Mr. Croft's new location. When Croft and the Barlows arrived at Leanne's house on Friday afternoon to collect the deed, they were met not by a frightened widow, but by Jasper Kane sitting on the porch, cleaning his Colt, and 2 federal marshals who had ridden in on the morning train. The Barlows surrendered without a fight. Croft, ever the gentleman, had tried to bluff his way out, but the warrant from California was ironclad. Harmony Gulch watched in stunned silence as the man who had owned them was led away in irons. Now, in the quiet of the autumn afternoon, Jasper finished his work and carried an armload of wood inside. Leanne met him at the door, taking the logs from him. Their hands brushed, a simple touch that sent a current of warmth through them both. "The tea is ready," she said softly. He followed her into the main room, which now felt less like a workshop and more like a home. A small, colorful rug lay on the floor, and a pot of late-blooming chrysanthemums sat on the windowsill. She handed him a cup of tea. He took it, his calloused fingers gentle on the delicate porcelain. He was no longer the detached observer in the corner of the saloon, drinking wine and watching the world go by. He was a part of this world now, a part of her world. Leanne looked at him, a soft smile on her face. In a trunk at the foot of her bed, the pink silk cheongsam was carefully folded away, a memory of a day that had changed everything. She wore a simple dress of blue cotton now, the dress of a woman who was building a life, not just surviving one. "You have good hands, Jasper Kane," she said, her eyes on his as he held the teacup. "They are strong enough to split wood, steady enough to face down bullies, and gentle enough to hold a teacup without breaking it." He looked down at his own hands, then back at her. A slow smile spread across his face, reaching his stormy eyes and turning them the color of a clear summer sky. "It's all in finding what's worth holding on to." They sat together as the afternoon light faded, the comfortable silence between them filled with the unspoken promise of a future, built not on grand declarations, but on small, shared moments of peace, as plain and as strong as a stone pulled from a riverbed. And that brings us to the end of this one. If you stayed with me all the way through, thank you. Stories like this one only get told because folks like you sit down and listen. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want more stories from the old frontier, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take care of yourself, and thanks again for being here.